Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that, but it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolon Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors.
This episode of The Prosecutors is brought to you by Huggies Little Movers. Get your baby's butt into Huggies Little Movers. We got you, baby. I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are The Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we conclude our look at the Karen Read trial. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my ready-to-be-finished co-host, Alice.
Absolutely. I've been ready to be finished since probably episode 1, but, we have no one to blame but ourselves because we talk a lot and perhaps a months-long trial, which we just can't stop things halfway. Like it or hate it, that's just the way we are. But today, Brett, we're going to be here to the bitter end. We're going to finish this case because the people have told us to get off Karen Read.
I can tell you, we could have done like 18 episodes on this because half our episodes were 2 hours long. So, you guys should be thankful. Plus, we cut down some of this. And let me just say, those of you who are whining or complaining about us leaving something out of some witness, just know we did that for you. We did that for you. We could have spent as long as we wanted to on this case. But today, we are finishing in a brisk 9 episodes. It's almost nothing.
This is no murder. Over time, usually they say when you do things more, you get better and more efficient. I think we're the opposite. I think we get more long-winded and our episodes get longer. So I don't know what that says about us. Old age.
I think about that all the time. Like if we did Maura Murray today, how many episodes would we do?
24.
Probably not 4.
24. I don't think we do anything in 4 episodes anymore. I'm sorry. For those of you who are like, you've changed, bro. Apparently we have. Not on purpose, but we just get long-winded.
We'll talk a lot more.
Like right now.
Like we're doing right now. Okay, well, let's get into it, Alice. Let's dive back into it.
So last time, you may remember, we were talking about all of this like forensic evidence of a car strike of Karen Read's car to John O'Keefe that was being laid out very far into the prosecution's case, and how effective that evidence is, but perhaps coming much too late in the storytelling to effectively grab the jury's attention and to frame the prosecution's theory. Well, it continues because the prosecution next calls Dr. Renee Stonebridge, and she's the director of cardiac and neuropathology at the state's medical examiner's office. And she's very straightforward. Her testimony is that she confirms John died from acute traumatic injuries that were consistent with a fall or being struck by a vehicle and falling to the ground. So however he gets to it, there's like some impact, and it's possible that a car could have caused that impact. Pretty straightforward. She's not the first expert to have said this, but she's like this disinterested medical expert. And there is no cross-examination of her. You know, we've already talked about the strategy of whether to cross or not. She's pretty straightforward. They don't really dig into it. So now I'm just going off with like, you're not crossing her if you just can't show that she's part of the conspiracy. She's just she's a really high up medical expert here. Not expert, she's a doctor. So she doesn't have a role in the conspiracy. But that's something that they're going to have to bring an expert in to rebut. So next we have Irini Scorbello. Now she is a pathologist who performed the autopsy on John. And she said that by the way, this is important because we're going to hear from experts later from the defense who don't actually examine the evidence. So Bello here is the person who conducted the autopsy on John's body. And she said there were 5 possible categories of manner of death. They are, this is going to be what we call the kitchen sink approach: natural, accidental, which could include motor vehicle accident, drug overdose, elderly falls, really anything that's not on purpose is categorized as an accident. Homicidal, and these are injuries inflicted by another person with evidence of intent to cause fear, harm, or death. It could be suicide, and it could also be undetermined. I don't think there are other categories of death than these, not that I think I've seen in autopsies. So these are medical terms, not legal determinations. So she's saying it could be any of these categories. And because of that, she marked undetermined for John's manner of death. And she explained that she could determine that the cause of the head trauma and hypothermia through her medical examination. She just can say that happened. She can't necessarily say what caused those things to happen. But in a case like this, the manner of death would be determined by circumstances and information she just didn't have. So it's not that the body can't tell her that. She is working with a very specific set of facts. The body in front of her. None of the circumstances, the tire marks, what people have said around it. Nor should she, because she is just trying to determine the actual cause of death. And the whole point here is there could be a lot of things that ultimately caused the manner of death, but she is not privy to any of the circumstantial evidence around how his body was found, etc.
And she talked about the majority of his injuries, that they were to the back of his head and to his right arm. The injuries to the head originated from a fracture at the back of his head when it came into contact with a blunt object. Now, we've heard a lot about John's black eyes, and I think this is one of the reasons some people thought maybe he was in a fight. But she explained that this was actually due to the injury to the back of his skull, and this is a pretty common thing you see when you have these kinds of injuries. In addition, she noted a small abrasion on his upper inner right arm and abrasions on the outside of his right arm and forearm, abrasions on both his hands and his right knee. John's injuries were not immediately lethal, but they would have incapacitated him, and this resulted in hypothermia, as obviously after he was incapacitated, he ended up outside for a very long time. The doctor saw no signs of a fight or altercation, and she noted that injuries to his hands were the result of life-saving measures. So basically, they're trying to get the IVs in, everything like that. That can cause bruising and other signs of injuries. He had rib fractures, which might seem important at first because you would think, oh, there you go. Maybe when he got struck by the car, it injured his ribs. But the doctor actually opined that this was the result of CPR. There were a lot of different people who did CPR on John, and you often see these rib fractures from CPR. Now, he had no damage or bruising to his knuckles, no breaks to his fingernails, no bone fractures to his fingers or anywhere in his hands, which is some of all of which you'd expect to see if he'd been in a fight. So if he got in a fight, he got the worst part of it. He didn't get off any swings, no punches, no defensive wounds, nothing. She did testify, as Alice said, that John's head injuries were consistent with striking his head on concrete or frozen ground, and that a single impact with a fall could cause all the injuries that resulted in John's death. She also noted that John's blood alcohol level was 0.21 when tests were done, and this would have been higher at the time of his death because he was alive for a while and he was processing alcohol, albeit probably at a slower rate than you would expect to see if he weren't laying in the snow. In cross-examination, the doctor was asked if she thought the injuries were consistent with Reed hitting him with her car, which is a big question, right? I mean, nobody has really been able to say that. And she says, It's likely and unlikely at the same time, depending on the position of the body in the vehicle in question. Now, this is actually a really important thing. She says this, and it feels like a throwaway line. It certainly doesn't feel like it's super helpful for the prosecution, but in a way it is. Because what she's saying, I would say not very artfully, is that whether or not he was struck is going to depend almost entirely about where he was, his position of his body, what exactly was hit, all these variables that she has no knowledge of. If you're saying, was he struck in a certain way, that's unlikely. But it might be that certain things, certain positions, could be likely. If you could show that that was the position he was in, that would be consistent with his injuries. She doesn't have this information, so she's hedging her bets.
And this is really interesting because the prosecution ends with this pathologist. I personally probably would have ended with Stonebridge because Stonebridge kind of answers that question that the pathologist doesn't have information to, which is that this was caused by a traumatic fall, whatever it was. And then you can tie it together as a prosecution or someone else. I've now forgotten all the other witnesses, but I do think that it was telling that you're ending with someone who is not given the full picture. And that's this person's job. This person is not supposed to have the full picture because it may cloud their medical judgment of what they're supposed to do in front of them.
Well, and it kind of ends with doubt in a way, right? Yeah. Because she's not definitively saying what you want her to say. Put her way earlier in the case when there's still lots of evidence to come, and you have her come in. She talks about this. She talks about the manner of death. Have her say the thing about it would really depend on where his body was. And then later on, when you have an expert, a witness who's going to say, well, he was struck in this really weird way where he got kind of spun around and it was not a direct strike, then that feeds into what she said earlier and it kind of papers over the weakness of what she said. Personally, I would have ended with the phone calls. I would have ended the way we ended the last episode. That would have been the end for me. I mean, maybe you can play around with having a relative up there to sort of talk about John or something like that. But as far as the actual evidence goes, I would have ended with that. This is the ultimate ending with a whimper thing. And just goes back to, and I hate to be critical of the prosecution because, as I've said many times, it's easy to be a critic. It's hard to be in the arena. They had to make a lot of decisions. But the order of witnesses in this case is inexplicable to me. It is hard for me to even come up with a strategy. Like, I can explain away the conspiracy. Like we said last time, they're just really worried about the conspiracy. They want to knock it down immediately. Okay, I don't agree with that, but fine. But these two at the end makes no sense.
Yeah, at the very least, I would put a lot of thought into who your first witness is and your last witness is. And it didn't seem like that happened here. It was almost like, oh my goodness, we have to have the pathologist on the stand. And look, a lot goes into trial ordering. Sometimes people just, maybe the pathologist was out of town for the first 6 weeks of the trial. That is possible. Unlikely, but possible. Okay, we're going to keep moving through because the prosecution, y'all, has finally rested. And now is the defense's case. And the defense does put on a case. Remember, we've talked about the defense doesn't necessarily have to call any witnesses, but they do in this case. And first, they call the snow plow driver we've talked a lot about, Brian Lucky Loughran. So he was a former pizza delivery driver, and he knew where the Alberts lived just by delivering pizzas in his former job. And he was friendly with them. It's a small town. And now he was a snowplow driver. We know that there was a nor'easter that night. There was a blizzard, so the snowplow was out. Around 2:30 or 2:45, he said that he was plowing the road. And when he passed the Alberts, he testified he didn't see anything in the front lawn. He later passed it at about 3:15 or 3:30, and again he says he never saw a body. Now, the whole point of this is, of course, the defense's theory that John wasn't out there, right? He was, I guess, planted there later on. Now, he did see a Ford Edge parked on the road near the Alberts house, and apparently this Edge was just sitting in front of where the body was. So then that kind of cast doubt on whether he would have seen a body at all if a car was blocking his view. Now, on cross-examination, the Commonwealth brought out that there was no street lighting on the road, and this is obviously middle of the night, blizzard, and despite Brian's repeated references to a sidewalk, there actually was no sidewalk on Fairview either. to kind of cast doubt on how vigilant he was and what he remembers from this street when he was plowing probably a lot of streets that night. Brian's story has changed several times, with him initially saying he went past Fairview at 12 a.m. and then 2 a.m., and then saying he saw the Ford Edge at 1:30 a.m. or 2 a.m. He also initially said he'd been back by Fairview at 6:30 a.m. and saw police, but testified to being there closer to 5 a.m. So obviously the time he actually drove by Fairview would have been important, and his story's changed so many times that he could have been there anytime between like midnight all the way to when John's body was found and the police were already on scene. And that is problematic in terms of trying to use him to set any times in stone. And again, we've talked about this, not necessarily lying. Time is a very difficult thing to remember, certainly when you don't know time matters when you are living it. Now, although Brian testified to how closely he was paying attention while driving his plow, which, by the way, I would think anyone whose job was driving something would testify that, of course, they're careful and that they pay attention, right? That's what you're supposed to do, is to pay attention. While Lally brought out that he also hit a basketball goal that night, calling into question just how carefully he was paying attention that night. He did not recall the specific time he hit the hoop, but it was significant enough that he had to report this collision to his supervisor. And it also came out that, not to any fault of his own, but he's colorblind, which could affect his ability to see things clearly, especially in the middle of the night with no street lighting during a blizzard.
And even when he's on the stand, they're showing stuff on the screen and he can't see it very well. And it reminded me almost of My Cousin Vinny. There's that scene with the lady and he's standing in the back holding up the fingers, and she really thought she saw what she saw, but it turned out she didn't see that well. And here's the thing about the snowplow driver. I mean, he seems like a nice guy. The thing about him, there is a guy like him in every single case. I don't care what case you're talking about. There's always somebody who seems kind of random, they're unconnected, no reason to lie, who comes in and tells a story that is just completely inconsistent with really anything. Because the thing about Lucky is he doesn't even really fit with the defense's theory, because he's driving up and down at a time you would expect John's body would already be out there. They already would have dumped him out there because they're already thinking about how long does it take to die in the cold. He needs to be out there as soon as possible, because the last thing you want is for him to be rescued the next morning. But when he's driving by, there's nothing there. The Ford Edge thing is weird, because why would you just have this car parked there? He talks about, when he's talking about how he plows, that he looks in the yards. Why would you do that? You're trying to plow the street. Like, what's in the yard isn't actually that important to you. And there's also the fact that he remembers so specifically the times that he passed the Albert House when that would be not important to him at all at the time. Wouldn't matter to him at all at the time, because he doesn't see anything. He doesn't see a body. But he hits this basketball goal, which also makes you question a little bit just how closely he was paying attention. But he hits the basketball goal. This is a really important event for him that night. He's now going to have to report that to a supervisor. And in fact, he does report it to the supervisor. But even though in the moment that would have been a really significant thing for him, doesn't remember the time. Couldn't tell you when it happened. When it's what he didn't see, the time he didn't see something, well, then it's absolutely well after the body should have been there.
And just by the way, not to hate on Brian at all, I think this is exactly what you expect of a snowplow driver. Any of you who've driven through a lot of snow or like massive rain where there's like water or snow flying off your tires on both sides, which is exponentiated when you have a plow in front of you, right? The whole point of the plow is to push things aside. And if you've ever seen one of these snowplow works, it's going to the sides, right? It's not like drinking up the snow. So the snow has to go somewhere. And what you have to do is stare straight ahead. And really, you're almost in a tunnel of white because the snow is flying on both sides of you. So it doesn't surprise me that he doesn't remember whether there's a sidewalk or misremembers there's a sidewalk, because to do his job, he actually kind of has to stay the course, stare straight ahead. And honestly, him hitting a basketball goal, I probably would have hit a basketball goal if I was snowplowing as well. Sure, it shows that maybe he wasn't as careful as he should have been, but to expect the snowplow driver to remember the times and also be looking over his shoulder at every single lawn that he passes is a little unreasonable to expect of what he is called to do at that time at 2:30, which is to clear the roads of snow. He's not an investigator. He's not the neighborhood security driving around to make sure there's no funny business happening in people's yards. guards. So they're asking a lot of him, and he ends up looking kind of foolish because his story has changed so many times, because he had to admit that he's colorblind, hit a basketball goal, all these things. I just want to pull us out of that for a moment and think about, like, Brian was just doing his job. It's kind of the defense putting him in the middle of trying to be the center of having the timeline and proving that that John's body wasn't there. He's not the right person for the job, but he's being forced into something that is not naturally what you would expect of him to be able to testify about.
And look, I liked him. He seemed like a perfectly nice guy, but I felt like he had been taken advantage of, frankly, by the defense, and sort of put in a position where he said the thing they wanted him to say, but...
And they got ripped apart.
Yeah, and I don't put a lot of stock in what he says. And look, if you just want a solid, like a piece of evidence, if you don't like sort of us judging him by how he says it or what he says, John didn't have any snow beneath him. There was grass beneath him. So his body was out there early enough that whatever little snow would have been beneath him would have melted and wouldn't have refrozen, by the way, which is important because that's usually what happens when you have a body on snow is some melts and it refreezes and you have what you call a corpse bed. But he needed to be out there much earlier. It was snowing by midnight. This is 2:30, 3 o'clock, and you're saying his body's still not out there? Well, then when they put him out there would have been snow underneath him. There's no way that it would have been grass, and yet it was. And I think that fact, that iron fact, you put that against what he's saying, and it just doesn't add up.
Yeah. You said it so much better than me. I think I'm defending him because I feel like he's been taken advantage of.
I absolutely think he was. And I think it is so hard to take yourself out of the circus that was this trial and the circus that was everything going on around it and the media presence by certain people and how they involved themselves in this case. I just don't think you can look at any of these witnesses, particularly on the defense, without that in the back of your mind. Dr. Marie Russell. That was a really interesting person for a lot of different reasons. So she was a retired emergency room physician, and she had previously worked for the California State Prison and as a Malden police officer in the early 80s. One thing, you're going to see a bunch of people from California, the defense called. I assume that's because Alan Jackson knows them from prior cases, because he's calling a bunch of California people. So in the 90s, she served in the LA coroner's office, and she published an article on animal bites and scratches. So you would think this is going to be a really good person for the whole dog thing, though her publications are going to come back to haunt her a little bit. She's very interested in dog bites. She said the injuries on John's arm, that right arm, were consistent with an animal, possibly a large dog bite or claw marks. She reviewed photographs. She did not have access to John's body. She agreed that whatever it was not a solid contact from the dog, which, by the way, is obvious because... I'm sorry, the marks don't actually look dog bites, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So she said, other than pointing to the parallel lines in what she describes as tiny puncture holes caused by a dog, she never really describes why she thinks this is a dog bite as opposed to any of the other various ways you could have this injury. And she sort of describes it as this almost like a hesitant strike or something. Like the dog is biting, but not hard enough that you're going to see a lot of the things you would expect, which she has to say, because that's the best you can get out of these wounds. Now, on cross-examination, Lally, he notes that she had not worked in forensics since the 90s. She became involved in the case after reading an article in the Boston Globe, and she reached out to the defense through a prosecutor friend in May of 2024 after the trial had started, which just blows my mind. You know, an expert involving themselves in a case. Like, I can go ahead and tell you, when she called the defense, you knew what she was going to say. She read an article about this. She didn't have access to, any of the documents or the good photographs or any of the stuff you'd want an expert to consider before making an expert opinion. And she'd already decided what this was going to be when she called the defense attorney. I was stunned by this, and Lally brought it out a little bit. I thought he spent too much time focusing on when she got her Boston Globe membership and not enough time focusing on how strange it was that she is the one making overtures to the defense and not the other way around. Now, some other things he pointed out that kind of blew my mind. She'd only reviewed some of the files 2 days before her testimony, and she didn't create a written report, which, I mean, without a written report, I'm not even sure you could get that in our jurisdiction. Because one of the things you have to do is produce a report to the other side so that the other side can consider getting a new expert, be on notice of what you're going to say, be able to challenge your reasoning. So clearly in Massachusetts, that's not the case, but that's just typically you would have a report.
It's like the baseline of any expert.
I know.
It's literally the baseline of any expert, so much so that often you have a report. You always have a report. You don't always testify. That's why when you retain an expert, there's usually 2 fees. One for preparing the report and a higher fee for testifying, because you don't all testify as experts. And what you usually get hired for is to produce a report. That's how kind of out of the ordinary this is.
And the other thing that's out of the ordinary, I mean, not out in the ordinary, but kind of questionable in this day and age, is you got somebody looking at photographs and saying, those are definitely teeth. No doubt about it. In fact, it's dog teeth. And if I had to say, it's a large dog. I'm not going to say it's a German Shepherd, but I probably would if you asked me, right? Well, Lally, he points out that forensic odontology has been on the outs as a forensic science for a very long time. Now, Russell would argue that was really about matching a bite to a specific person. Okay, that's true, but the same criticism would apply to matching a bite to a particular type of dog or a particular animal. And, you know, you think about, I'm always drawn back to West Memphis 3. In the West Memphis 3 case, you have exactly the same thing. You have all these experts who are looking at marks. Some of them say it's a knife. Some of them say it's a person. Some of them say it's turtles. Some of them say it's dogs. And it's like, what do you actually know, right? about this? You're just sort of throwing it out there. Then Lally does the typical thing you do when you're attacking an expert. He reviews the article that Russell wrote in the 90s, which reviewed 700 cases of dog bites. The spectrum of injuries you'd expect to see are deep puncture wounds, crushing wounds, wounds requiring debridement, deep bruising, and broken bones. Now, Russell said those would be dog bite wounds that required medical treatment, sort of a serious strike. Now, I just want to back up here. What are we talking about? Are we talking about a theory that this German Shepherd attacked this man in such a vicious way that it required the rest of the family to cover it up? You know, we're talking about a dog, depending on what your theory is, that like John got in a fight and the dog, to defend her owner, jumps up and bites this man. Guess what? If the dog had done that, it would have been a serious bite. And you would have seen all these things. And now I'm going to tell my stories. So you got to like wait on me for a second, Alice. So if you have anything to say, you might want to say it now.
No, I can't wait for this story. Go for it. We did tell them 1 episode. So, you know, it might be a 5-hour episode, but we're going to do it.
Yeah, maybe. So I have been bitten by dogs twice, once by a German Shepherd, once by a hunting dog. I have witnessed a dog bite someone on the arm right in front of me. And here's what I can tell you. I'm going to tell you the story of my second most recent dog bite, because it was what I would think is a relatively minor bite. So basically, we had just moved into our house. There was mail for the old owner who had rented a place right behind our house. So I walked the mail over. Well, his dog was out front. So, and his dog was barking at me and all this other stuff. And I had the mail. And so I wanted to get the mail like up to the front porch. So basically, I kind of throw the mail up to the front porch. Now, the dog is behind an electric fence. So it's like literally I'm standing there. There's the fence. There's the dog right, 6 inches away from me, barking like crazy. I throw the mail. Well, when I throw the mail, it's like the dog thought, I have to just take one for my owner. So the dog actually leaps across the electric fence and bites me on the leg, right? But immediately gets shocked by the electric fence. So as soon as he bit me, he released and fell backwards like in pain, right? So this was like the fastest bite you could imagine. And in fact, it happened so fast that I was hopeful that the damage was relatively low. Because, it hurt, but it didn't hurt that bad. So the dog, there were puncture holes in my jeans where the dog's teeth had gone through my jeans. And those puncture holes went into my leg and created like these deep wounds. Immediately started swelling. Immediately started bruising. And guess what? They were on both sides of my leg. Because here's the thing about a dog. It doesn't just have top teeth or bottom teeth. It has teeth on both sides. And so when it bites you, you are wounded on both sides. And what is the thing about the wounds on John's arms? Only on one side, number one. Number two, no puncture wounds. Number three, no bruising, no broken bones, nothing that would indicate this was actually a dog bite. And I've told the story before, but I'm going to tell it again because, I mean, it's like my most, awesome moment. Didn't have any like alcohol or peroxide at the house. All I had was a bottle of Jack Daniels. So I went back to the house, grabbed that bottle of Jack Daniels, poured it right on the wound, and that's the way I cleansed
Disinfected.
Disinfected
You
it
didn't go to
because
the
we were
doctor.
leaving. Well, we were leaving the next day on a big trip, and I didn't want to go to the doctor, so I just tried to do the best I could
So
with
I
my
can
home remedies,
verify
and I
this
was
story.
fine.
This is not an exaggeration because I was texting Brett at the time, and he was like, "Just got bit," and I was like, "Should you go to the hospital?" He's like, "Pour some Jack Daniels on it," and I was like, "I think you're doing that just for the story."
It was a great story, though.
But that's
and
a
I
great.
wish.
And I saw that bite. It was bad.
Yeah,
Like
it
it
was
looked
bad.
bad. And I saw you after you got back from your trip and it was bad. Like it was red and gross. And like, I think I told you to go to the hospital because I was like, is it infected?
And it's fully recovered. I've fully recovered, by the way. But here's the thing about this. One of the things you'll hear from experts and from the defense attorneys and all this other stuff is that John should have had bruising. From whatever happened to him, he should have had bruising, and he doesn't have bruising. Yeah, he should have. And he should have bruising if he was bitten by a dog, too. And if there is one expert that I do not understand, or one question I do not understand why the Commonwealth never asked, is what is being in the cold? What effect does that have on bruising? Because if you had been bitten by a dog in a warm, climate-controlled house, you probably would have bruising because your blood's pumping and everything else. That's the environment where you'd have bruising. But if whatever happened to you while you were outside and you immediately ended up in the cold and then you're covered up with snow, guess what happens? All your blood rushes from your extremities to your core to try and prevent you from dying. So it's not that surprising that we don't see any bruising on John's body. But if he had been bitten by a dog in that house, he should have had bruising. How is it possible that you could be bitten by a dog and not have any bruising? And yet, this is where we are with this expert. Now, Lally does a good job about noting that there are only wounds on one side as opposed to both sides. He notes the lack of dog DNA. Russell, thinking she's clever, says, well, it would have been on his clothes. Unfortunately for her, it was the clothes that had been swabbed for DNA, not John's wounds or skin. And as we said before, it was negative for DNA. So look, if you want to believe that John was attacked by a dog, just know that it is the weirdest attack by a dog, particularly one protecting its owner, that I've ever heard of and that this doctor has ever seen. And it would have been an attack that was so minor that it would not have required him to go to the hospital. Those are her words, not mine.
Yeah. I'm not going to add to your dog story because there's no dog story bite that's going to be as good as that one. But I did have a German Shepherd. You guys know this. And if you've ever had a German Shepherd, you know that as a puppy, and they're puppies for 3 years, they nip, right? That is their, I don't know. That's how they grow their teeth. Doesn't feel good for them. So all the dogs do is they nip. And so all of my clothes that I owned have like bite marks on the legs. All my dresses, all my skirts, all my work clothes, all my pants from my German Shepherd, not attacking me, just like her way of massaging her mouth and love nipping me, right? And that is the closest to what this particular expert is trying to testify to as to kind of the degree of bite in which this dog had to bite not their owner, but presumably someone they perceive to be an enemy. Even with the constant nipping by my dog, and this would be like while on walks or when she wanted to go outside or have some food, and I was her person, right? Like I was her handler. I was her best friend. Every night I would look down on my leg and it would be bruised. And there would be scratch marks, almost like nail marks, because she was kind of like gently dragging her bottom teeth across my leg, but it would all be bruised because German Shepherds are incredibly powerful animals. So her love bites described in this kind of halfway manner by Dr. Russell is exactly what I had, but a lot of bruising to go along with it.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/Wondery.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Bombas makes the most comfortable socks, underwear, and T-shirts.
Warning, Bombas are so absurdly comfortable you may throw out all your other clothes.
Sorry, do we legally have to say that?
No, this is just how I talk, and I really love my Bombas.
They do feel that good. And they do good, too. One item purchased equals one item donated.
To feel good and do good, go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
And it's actually interesting that you mentioned that, because one of the things that people have said, and look, I have no idea how the winds got to his arm. I actually think the winds to his arm are a problem for whatever theory you have. I think they could have been caused by the car. I think they could have been caused by something we're not even thinking about. I'm not sure. One theory people have had who thinks John fell, so let's just say he just fell, is that some animal sort of pawed at him. And some people who have German Shepherds have kind of made the argument that Alice is not making but describing, that it could just be sort of a nervous German Shepherd coming upon someone and them just doing sort of what you're describing, and maybe that caused the wounds. The problem with that is, once again, it would have left DNA. So I don't know how you get around the DNA. I mean, the only way to get around the DNA is that this is once again part of the conspiracy. Yeah, Proctor washed the clothes before he whatever. I mean, it has to be something like that, right?
Yeah,
that's
my
the only way you
clothes
can
were
get around
also
that.
soaking with saliva as well.
And also, somehow he washed the clothes and got rid of the dog DNA, but didn't get rid of the pork DNA, which you think he would have gotten rid of, which probably came from, the like cheese fries they were eating at the bar earlier on, not from either feral hogs or somehow this dog bit him and only transferred DNA from a snack, not from its mouth. My dog, love my dog, great dog. But this week we got a package, and I don't know why, but man, he hates delivery drivers, and he was particularly mad at this delivery driver. We always keep him inside until they leave. So the delivery driver leaves, he runs off, can't find the delivery driver, walks back up to the porch where the package is sitting and bites the package. And let me tell you, there are two things about it. Number one, teeth marks on both sides of the package, including, punctures, and just dog drool all over it from this one bite where he's just biting the package. You would have seen something like this on John. I don't know what happened to him. The only thing I can tell you did not happen to him. He wasn't bitten by Chloe.
Right. Okay, getting into more experts from the defense. The defense then calls Richard Green, who's the owner of a digital investigations firm, to attempt to rebut the state's argument that the search How Long to Die in the cold search was done after 2:27 a.m. He said the search happened at or before 2:27. We expect him to say that. He's the defense's expert. Now, on cross-examination, he does acknowledge that there was a second search on how long it took to die in the cold at 6:24 a.m. So in other words, the search that the prosecution said happened at 6:24, he agrees happened. He's just saying there was another search at 2:27. Now, this would be really strange because it would mean that Jen McCabe searched for this very thing 4 hours earlier and then just so happened to search it again 1 minute after the prosecution's expert said she made the original search. Now, Green also testified that the search was made at the same time as a search for It's Raining Men. We heard testimony about that, family inside joke that they were dancing to the night of the party, and for a youth sports program. Remember her daughter's youth sports program. We know that these two searches would have happened hours apart, though. But based on what Green is saying, this would have happened all at the same time. So she was doing It's Raining Men. They're dancing around to It's Raining Men and umbrellas. And she's searching How Long to Die because John's outside dying. And then she's also like, do I need more uniforms for my daughter's basketball team? Now, Green confirmed that John's cell phone arrived at 34 Fairview at 12:24 a.m. And Green was confronted with the data that John was walking and climbing stairs when he was still away from the house. So how can you explain that? Green suggested that it was possible the Waze data was 3 minutes off. But even if this were the case, it still doesn't put John in the house going up and down the stairs at the time that the defense needs him to be doing so. So Green attempted to contact Cellbrite. Remember, Cellbrite, we explained last time, was like the biggest firm that does data analysis for cell phones. He tried to call someone there to discuss his findings with them, but he was unable to make the connection. He used something called Cellhawk.
And this whole exchange is hilarious when he's talking about trying to get basically tech support at Cellbrite, and he can't get through. And look, I mean, there's a couple things to say about this. Number one, you guys often ask us, how do you make this distinction? How do you decide who to trust between the two experts? You have a prosecution expert who's saying one thing, and you have a defense expert who's saying the exact opposite. Number one, the prosecution, you can chide them for a lot of things, but they went for the very best when it came to cell phone experts. I mean, Cellbrite, that's who we use. They know what they're talking about. They got great experts from there. They said a lot of really good things. But there's something, assume, you don't like that sort of argument from expertise. You want something else. Alice put her finger on it. Look at his own testimony, and you see the error in his analysis. It is not the case. I don't care what happened. It is not the case that all three of those searches happened around the same time. That didn't happen. She wasn't searching Hose Long to Die in the Cold while looking for It's Raining Men, while also looking for her daughter's basketball team. He is misreading the data that we now know was 3 separate searches at 3 separate times on one tab. And he is not making that distinction. He has missed that for some reason. So when he looks at the data, he sees these 3 searches all happening at the same time because he is only looking at when that tab was opened. And he's messing it up, and he can't make the distinction. And this is a fact can't be true. It simply can't be true that all 3 of those things happen at the same time. It's just no way. It just doesn't even fit with anybody's theory of how this went down, particularly the It's Raining Men thing. I mean, that would have happened before. I mean, whatever your theory of this conspiracy, that would have happened before she's searching How Long to Die in the Cold. Because by 2:27, everybody's gone, right? Like they've already taken people home and everything else. So there is an error in his own analysis, and you can see it yourself without being an expert. And that's the thing about analyzing expert testimony. It is persuasive, but it is for you to weigh. And you're supposed to use your own common sense, your life experience, what makes sense to you when evaluating it. It's one reason that DNA is so tough, because DNA, you don't have a lot of life experience with. You don't really know how to analyze it. The doctors come in, they tell you what they tell you, and you just kind of have to go with it. So you notice there was no cross-examination of those experts. You got to come up with something else to explain that because you can't get at the science. But when it's something like this that requires a little bit more extrapolation, when it's not as hard a science, when it's something you're more familiar with, when it involves facts that you can consider independently, you are just as qualified as anybody to look at that testimony and see whether or not it's convincing. So that was Dr. Richard Green. I don't know if he's a doctor. That was Richard Green. And I really thought the first 3 witnesses for the defense were kind of crash and burn. I think they all happened on the same day, the first day of the defense's testimony, and I just didn't think it was a very good day for them. It gets a little bit better for them the next day. We start with Dr. Frank Sheridan. Now, he is a retired medical examiner from San Bernardino County, California. He describes, once again, we're back to the wounds. He describes the wounds on the arm as friction injuries, which I think is interesting. He notes that he did not see the bruising you'd expect with a car injury, which I feel like I've explained that. He says the injuries could have been caused by a dog's teeth or claws. He notes no leg injuries, and he says injuries were consistent with a fight in a general sense, whatever that means. On cross, Sheridan would say, and this is one way we go at experts, is to basically, do you know anything about this case, essentially? Sheridan wasn't aware there was no dog DNA found on John. He didn't know about the microscopic taillight pieces in John's shirt. He acknowledged that most of the strikes he saw were direct hits from the front, not the kind of hit you would see in this case. He agreed that the location of an individual would have a significant effect on injuries. He'd never done an autopsy on someone who had been sideswiped. He said that O'Keefe being hit by a car and hitting his head on the ground would cause the injuries that John had. So, great way to debunk a expert.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, this is very typical, right? He's testifying exactly what really the defense's theory is, and you would expect them to only put on someone who would do that. Except the problem here is that expert was only able to reach what the defense wanted him to reach with a very limited set of inputs. And so when exposed to kind of the whole picture, he essentially is a prosecution witness now. He agrees with everything that the prosecution's witnesses have said. He just didn't have the whole picture. Again, this happens a lot, and this is why you need cross-examination. Next is Dr. Daniel Wolf. Dr. Wolf works for ARCCA, which is an accident reconstruction firm that was hired by the FBI to look into the crash during their investigation of the handling of the case. We'll get back to this later, but I still don't really understand why the FBI was involved in this case. But nevertheless, although the jury was barred from hearing about this investigation, it did allow the defense to note that they had not hired or paid ARCCA for their work. In explaining his findings, Wolf said that, quote, assuming a pedestrian is positioned in a normal upright position, you'd expect to see more damage to the bumper. He noted here that the damage was isolated to the taillight and some surrounding areas. Because there was a broken glass at the scene, ARCCA used a pressurized air cannon to fire a similar object at a taillight to create that similar damage. Wolf said that striking only John's arm would not cause him to travel 30 feet. Then on cross-examination, Wolf acknowledged that it was common for shoes to come off in a pedestrian impact. John's shoes came off in this impact, or John's shoes came off here. Wolf talked about the limited information he was given at the beginning, what I just said about experts, saying that, quote, there was nothing in the material that indicated the questions we were to answer. He'd never physically viewed the SUV, even though it was available for inspection. And by the way, he was hired to do reconstruction of the accident of this car, but he didn't look at the car. Wolf acknowledged that where someone was positioned when they were struck would have a definite effect on their injuries. Paging the pathologist. Remember, this is what we heard from the prosecution's pathologist. He wasn't aware that Reed said she hit him or may have hit John, repeatedly, too many people testifying to her saying this. And he didn't know that John's DNA was recovered from the broken taillight. And he didn't know that taillight pieces were found on John's clothes. He did not review the state police reconstruction report, which is exactly what he was doing, and he did not know that the human hair found on the bumper was consistent with John's DNA. Those are all pretty important information for the totality of the circumstances here. Wolf also said that the supposed strike between Karen's car and John's parked vehicle, this is important, would not have caused any damage to Reed's taillight. So again, I saw a lot of people after this particular testimony go on social media and say like, oh my goodness, I'm totally convinced of the defense's case because of what Dr. Wolf had to say. I'm not going to lie, I don't see what that is, because on cross-examination, everything fell apart in the sense that he was able to reach what the defense wanted him to say with almost no facts of the case. And we are not looking in a vacuum, right? He wasn't told about the DNA, the hair, where he was standing. He essentially is saying everything on cross that the prosecution's forensic experts are saying. He's agreeing with them when given all the facts. And he's facing it for the first time. He didn't know these things ahead of time. He testified on a set of hypotheticals given to him. And those hypotheticals are just that, hypotheticals without the real life evidence that we have in this case. But I do think it's really important, and this is pretty bad for the defense, when he says that, okay, whatever you believe of whether Karen hit John, that taillight was not broken when she hit John's car, which is obviously what Karen Reed's explanation is of how her taillight got broken.
And I'll say a couple things about this guy. Number one, he definitively proved that John was not struck by the SUV in a way that no one is saying he was struck. I mean, he demolished that theory. So
That's literally what we call a straw man.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it was. He destroyed that, he burned that straw man to the ground. So we know that didn't happen. The other thing, people were so impressed by the cannon he built. He built the cannon to prove something that doesn't even matter. I mean, I don't know. Could John have thrown the glass at the taillight and shattered taillight? Maybe. Maybe that's what inspired her to back up at 24 miles an hour and hit him. What would have been so much more valuable is if the FBI, in its infinite wisdom, when it decided to hire this person, had given them all the information and said, hey, here's all the information. Given the fact that we have a 24-mile-an-hour backup, given the fact that we have the DNA and the broken taillight pieces and all this other stuff, can you create a reconstruction where her SUV hitting a person could have caused the injuries he had, caused the pattern of distribution that we see, and caused the damage on her car? And maybe he would have done it and either said, no, I can tell you, based on all the facts, that didn't happen, which would have been incredibly powerful, because then he would have disproven the actual theory of the prosecution and not another theory. Or he could have said, look, the variables are just too many, and I can't tell you that happened, which would have been great for the defense, because the defense could say, look, there's doubt for you. I mean, you just can't prove this. Sorry. The way it would have had to have happened for John to have been injured the way he was, it cannot be recreated. So you're just going to have to go on faith. When you're going on faith, that's an acquittal. Or maybe if he'd actually put all those variables in, he would have created a scenario by which this could have happened, and you would have seen what you saw, and that would have been really powerful evidence as well. But instead, we have him building a cannon so he can fire a glass into a car. I mean, I can tell you, if you throw a glass at a car hard enough, it's going to shatter the taillight. I don't need a cannon for that. So I'm not sure why we're building cannons. It's like...
It was a sideshow. Honestly, it was a shiny sideshow that distracted people from... It did nothing for his testimony, but it was a cannon that people could talk about.
And people were so impressed by the cannon. They're like, he built a cannon. Okay, great. I mean, what if he could have built a trebuchet for all I care? It doesn't prove anything if it doesn't have anything to do with the case. And just, I don't know. I mean, to me, the cross-examination was one of Lally's best. He ended on this cross because they didn't put on any rebuttal witnesses, which I think is a mistake. I wish they had of. As we talked about, I wish some of those witnesses that came in the case in chief had been held on to or had just been called back. You could have called back some of those witnesses to testify to a few of the things they testified to rebut some of this. And whether to call rebuttal witnesses is always a tough call, especially when you've had a trial going on as long as it has and the jury can see the light at the end of the tunnel and they just want to be done. But I feel like this was a case that probably some short rebuttal witnesses could have been really powerful. And we didn't have that. And that brings us to the final witness of the defense and of the trial, Dr. Rentschler. Now, Rentschler was another ARCA reconstructionist specializing in things like kinematics. He said that the injuries to John were inconsistent with a vehicle strike. And this was a good way for the defense to end. And it is what a lot of people took away from their presentation. Even now you hear people say this is one of the most convincing witnesses to them because his conclusion is one that is inconsistent with Karen Read being guilty. But here's what I want you to do. Go back and listen again. Listen to what he actually says. Like Wolf, Dr. Rentschler is describing a strike that is not the state's theory of the case. For instance, he talks about how if John's head was struck by the vehicle, you would see other injuries, worse injuries, which is true. But that is not the prosecution's theory. This would seem to be important, though, because Rentschler says that falling backwards was not enough to produce the damage to John. So you sort of have the situation where it's like, if he was struck by the car, there'd be more damage. If he just fell, not enough damage, so we must have something else must have happened. But the thing about that is, if you watch the cross, a lot of this stuff falls apart. On cross, Rentschler acknowledges that, in fact, John's skull fracture is consistent with slipping and striking his head. And then, in fact, there were almost infinite possibilities for what could have caused his injuries. In fact, Rentschler would say, quote, "We don't really have enough evidence to determine exactly what happened." Now, that's interesting because much like Wolf, Rentschler was unfamiliar with most of the evidence in this case. He didn't know that DNA was found on the taillight. He did not review the reconstructionist report from Trooper Paul, or the forensic reports, or the DNA reports, and he didn't go to view the SUV physically, which you think would be something you'd want to do if you want to say that the damage to that car is inconsistent with a strike and that a strike couldn't have killed John. And the report he did issue appears to have been premised on John wearing a jacket at the time, which, as we all know, he was not wearing, a fact that Rentschler was unaware of. And look, this goes back to sort of a fundamental thing. Jurors, people listening, you hear expert and you think, well, if it's an expert, what he says is gospel, right? I mean, that's almost the way people approach it. And that's not what you need to do. Think about what they say. See if it lines up with the facts of the case, not just some world out there, but the facts of the case. Think back to the Scott Peterson case. They're doing an experiment with a boat that's completely different from the one Scott Peterson was in. And they say you couldn't do it because if you did it, the boat would flip over. Well, how helpful is that when it's not the same boat? How helpful is that to you deciding whether or not Scott Peterson could have done it? In this case, you have a situation. Take the dog bite expert. Are those marks on John's arm consistent with some dog bites? Absolutely. You can come up with dog bites that are consistent with those marks. Are they consistent with the dog bite that has been posited in this case, in this circumstance, in this scenario? I don't think so. Similarly, when you hear Rentschler, he's talking about how this strike is inconsistent. Is it inconsistent with most car strikes? The injuries on John, are they inconsistent with most car strikes? Absolutely. Of course they are. But the prosecution is not suggesting a standard kind of strike here. Something weird happened that night. Even Karen Reed told people that she thought she only sideswiped to John, that it was sort of a brushing blow. We don't know exactly what happened that night, and it's an advantage to Karen that it wasn't a standard strike by a car. But just because Rentschler tells you this isn't consistent with your average car strike doesn't mean that Karen Reed's SUV didn't back into John that night. And that was the end of the trial. And before we get into the theories of what actually happened, if you've been living under a rock or you just follow this through us and you don't actually follow the news, is this was a hung jury. So that's right. After 9 episodes, we're just going to have to do it again. And I think next time we're going to try and do at least
ever.
20 episodes on this case for trial number 2 that's coming up in January of next year. Sunny Boston, middle of January. It's going to be amazing. The one good thing is you may not see as many crazy people outside the courthouse because I don't care what people tell you. People in Boston, just like everybody else, will go out for like a football game or something and tailgate, but it's cold outside, okay? It's going to be snowing. It's not going to be great. So that'll be better. That'll tamp that down at least a little bit. But trial number 2 is coming up. There's some weird stuff that maybe we'll talk about in a legal brief later on that has been filed. But essentially, hung jury, couldn't reach a conclusion. New trial to come. If I were the prosecution, I would seriously consider dropping the second-degree murder charge. We're going to talk about that in a second. But even if you think she's guilty of second-degree murder, when you get a hung jury like this, you really have to think seriously about your charges and about your evidence. And there's a lot of things the prosecution needs to think seriously about how to structure their case the second time around. We've talked about that a lot. But that is, if we see the same presentation next time that we saw last time, we will have the same or worse outcome. I have no doubt about that. So, wrapping things up, the Canton Conspiracy Countdown. Who did we end up with conspirators? And I feel like this is a pretty conservative list. So, actual conspirators: Katie McLaughlin, Officer Lane, Chris Albert, Julie Albert, Nicholas Albert, Nicole Albert, Chloe, Brian Albert, Brian Albert Jr., Caitlin Albert, Colin Albert, Jen McCabe, Allie McCabe, Matt McCabe, and Trooper Proctor. Conspiracy adjacent, people who are sort of necessary for the conspiracy to happen, but maybe you think didn't have as much knowledge: Officer Seraph, Timothy Nettle, Anthony Flamati, Greg Woodbury, Tristan Morris, Sarah Levinson, Julie Nagel, Ryan Nagel, Heather Maxson, Richard D'Antonio, Trooper Buhinick. And then the incompetents, Paul Gallagher, Sean Good, Trooper Paul. I'll put Trooper Proctor in the incompetents as well. He can have both. But a pretty lengthy list.
So if you were not counting, that would be 14 that fall squarely within the conspiracy, another 11 who are conspiracy adjacent. So if you count all of that together, would be 25 people part of the conspiracy. And again, this is not us putting everyone possible into a conspiracy. This is based on the cross-examinations by the defense and who they theorize are part of the conspiracy.
Yeah, we got a bunch of troopers and state lab people and that
just
are
left them
not.
out.
We didn't include. Yeah. I mean, Carrie Roberts, I don't think she's part of the conspiracy. I have no idea what the sort of larger conspiracy theory is, but that's a lot of people. And that's where that is. So,
by the way, this was not the last trial that Brett and I did, but the last drug trafficking conspiracy that we prosecuted together was a massive multi-year wiretap moving like more cocaine than you can even imagine. Like, I didn't understand these amounts. I had to like sit there and do the conversion because I don't do kilos to pounds very well in my head. And it's an insane amount, literally truckloads of cocaine per day moving through this conspiracy. And it was maybe max 15 people. And we didn't charge all 15. We charged like 5 of them. So,
and the vast majority of them had flipped. So,
and they all flipped. Yeah, they all
like
flipped. They were.
Guys.
Let me be clear. They were part of the conspiracy. Those 15 people. They flipped. They testified against each other, and they were definitely part of it. And we had wiretaps, dead to their rights, that they were part of this conspiracy. But this was one of the most massive like drug prosecutions. We're talking like 15 people.
And let me just also say, once again, I know some of you are really hung up on people getting rid of their cell phones, getting new cell phones, whatever. Jim McCabe's cell phone was looked at, and y'all think you're out there saying to yourself, well, people don't put really incriminating stuff in their cell phone. Yes, they do.
Did we not hear from Proctor?
Yes, exactly.
That wasn't incriminating. And they just put stupid things in text.
If I can get my hands on your cell phone and you're involved in a crime, I will prove your involvement in the crime. You can't even help yourself. It's gonna happen. There's gonna be stuff on there. You know why?
Can I tell you why? It relates to my whole dick pics on all these phones thing. People love to brag. And you know who they love to brag to? People they're sleeping with. Especially people they're sleeping with who they're not married to. So people they're not supposed to be sleeping with. They brag about it, and they are explicit. Man, I had drug dealers who literally told me the codes they used, when the drops were, in what amounts, for what the going price was. And I was like, you laid out my theory for me. It's like right here in your text. 2:31 a.m. Thanks. And they're like, yeah, that's right.
They'll do things like they'll be Snapchatting with somebody, and they'll use a code name, and the other person will be like, what? And they'll say, heroin. And it's like, there you go. Thanks, man.
That was the best. They'd be like, you have to be Mary Jane? That. And they're like, what? Like marijuana. Like the plant? It looks like this. Let me send you a drawing of it. Here's some in my car.
Like
with my license in the background.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. Okay. So we could just talk about that.
I'm sorry.
Alice loves talking about her cell phones.
No. I think this is all very relevant because the number matters. Okay? We're not talking about a 2-person conspiracy. We're not talking about a 3-person conspiracy of maybe even people who are married to each other. We talked about the Robert Wong case where we think 3 people are involved in terms of at least keeping evidence shut. Those 3 people had personal reasons to be tied to each other and not because they were Facebook friends with someone from high school or went to high school with someone 15 years ago. Those people were in a physical relationship with each other and emotional relationship. Here we are literally talking about like half the town, and these ties are relatively loose in terms of this the person you're going to bury a body with.
Okay. So let's talk about the theories. I think there are essentially 3 possibilities. 4 if you divide the conspiracy in half, which we're not going to do. I mean, we'll talk about both conspiracies, but it's either a conspiracy, Karen Read did it, or the thing we'll start with, an accident, like a pure accident, not a drunken accident, but a pure accident. and that's that John slipped and hit his head. So basically, under this theory, John gets really drunk, which he was. He was really drunk. He was over 0.2 by the time of his autopsy. He wants to go back to this house. He'd been fighting with Karen all day. We know that's true. She had some suspicions about him and other people. He's wanting to go to this house. Bella's mom is getting mentioned. Jen McCabe is calling him repeatedly. And at some point, Karen, either because she doesn't feel well or she just doesn't want to do this, she gets mad and she says, "Can we just go home?" And John's like, "No, I'm going to this house party." So she takes him to the house party. They're screaming at each other the whole time. There's that whole period where she's sitting in the SUV and it moves forward a couple times. That whole time they're fighting. She's trying to convince John to just leave and come home with her. He's not going to do it. He gets out of the car. Maybe he takes his glass and he's so angry that he throws it at Karen, hits the taillight, shatters the taillight. Pieces of it float down on his clothes because that has to happen. And she's mad because he just hit her car with a glass. And so she throws it in reverse. She backs up, but she doesn't hit him. And she takes off. And he's like, "Argh." But then as he's turning around, he slips, he falls. And because he's so drunk, he doesn't even stop his fall. And he just whacks his head as hard as you can imagine. Maybe on the curb, maybe on the frozen ground. Maybe he's not unconscious immediately. He sort of crawls to wherever he ends up, and that's where he is, and he dies. The injuries to his arms are caused by a scavenger, or maybe that curious dog we talked about earlier. Everything else is just dumb luck, or dumb unluck, I guess, for really everyone involved, from Karen to the people in the house. The taillight shards in his clothes just kind of get there. Karen's behavior, the DNA on the taillight, I mean, whatever. All this stuff, it's just really bad luck. Now, it seems unlikely that without something like a car striking John, that he could slip and fall and hit his head hard enough to shatter the back of his head. But this is the only non-conspiracy, non-Karen Read theory that you really have. Not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because as we go through the other stuff, I think it's going to become pretty clear that this is highly unlikely. But this is something that I think you at least have to keep in the back of your head as we're going through the evidence, because it is something that people who don't believe the conspiracy but think either Karen Read didn't do it or just that the Commonwealth didn't really prove what happened. This is sort of the backup to what could have happened that didn't involve Karen.
Yeah, that's a great point. A lot of people who don't fully know which side to believe, they think that this is like the neutral ground or somehow splitting the baby. But look at the evidence. An accident, a pure accident where there's no contact whatsoever with any car, specifically Karen's car, and John, is unlikely. We'll get into that in the next theory. So let's move on. The next theory, obviously one that we've talked about a lot and is the defense's theory, is that the group conspired to attack John. And this group, we listed about 25 people, whatever your group is, conspired to cover up an accident. So it could be one of them, a planned hit, or an accident happened and they're going to cover for one of their own. So the defense theory is that the group conspired to kill John. That's why they focus on the play fighting at the bar that we saw over and over on the security footage. It's why they asked multiple witnesses about luring John to the bar and then trying to separate Karen and John on their way to the house. It's why they talk about the basement so much and the possibility that Colin Albert slipped into the basement to wait on John when other members of the house party thought he'd simply left the party altogether. Now, this is not a mistake. The defense is smart enough to know that the preferred alternative theory, that there was an accident and the group was merely covering it up, because then you don't have to assign this like terrible, killing of their own in the police force sort of theory on them, is even less likely than a planned attack. And this is true for a couple reasons. First, if there was an accident, then the conspiracy has to include everyone at the house, including Brian Albert Jr., Sarah Levinston, and Julie Nagel. If John made it into the house and spent any time there before he suffered some sort of an accident, then these people would have seen him. His phone would have put him into the house. And that, honestly, I think that is a more palatable conspiracy to people, but the evidence just doesn't bear out. And so the defense decided not to go with it because it was really hard to tell that story. So they decided to go full conspiracy. As Brett said last time, you never go full conspiracy. Well, they went full conspiracy. And this is not an accident, but rather this was not an accident, but rather a planned attack. Okay, so we're a full conspiracy here.
And what's interesting about the accident theory is we will have people who criticize us for trying to say how large this group of people are. And they'll say, no, you guys keep saying it has to be half the city. And in fact, it could have been these couple people. Well, if it's those couple people, then it is a pre-planned conspiracy. So it's very interesting. Either you have to have like a just really wild conspiracy where it's pre-planned and they decided they were going to attack John that night. Or if it's an accident, the conspiracy has to be huge because all these people who would have seen him just naturally in the course of the night are now lying about it. They're lying about it to cover it up, what happened, and to frame Karen. You know, some people have said, it's not a conspiracy, it's just a cover-up. That is a conspiracy. The conspiracy to cover it up and blame someone else is a conspiracy. That's the heart of what's going on here. So that's the first thing. Second, Jen McCabe and Karen's phone usage seems to make an accident impossible. Karen dropped John off no later than 12:32-ish. She was back at the house at 12:36, and she was calling him at 12:33, so 1 minute later. But unlike earlier in the night, despite the fact she calls him over and over and over again, John never rejects her calls, and he never texts her to tell her he's not going to answer. This would at least indicate that he could not do so because he was already incapacitated. Then there are Jen's calls and texts. Jen is texting hello and where are you by 12:40. If there's one person who would definitely know if John walked into that house, it's Jen. So if there was an accident, it had to happen almost immediately. In fact, it had to happen so fast that by 12:40, John has been severely injured. The group has decided not to help him. They have begun to put in place a cover-up that begins with John having never entered the house, a cover-up that starts when Jen texts John at 12:40. All of that, the accident, the decision, the plan, and the texting has to happen between 12:32 and 12:40.
And then there's the mindset of the group. Assume there was an accident right after Karen dropped John off at the house. We know two things about it. First, it was not so serious that he would have died immediately. And second, the majority of the damage to John was to the rear of his head and his arm. Now, assuming the dog jumped on John and scratched up his arm, though it didn't violently latch on, as even the defense's own expert acknowledges that the dog bite was not one of the more serious kinds you would see and did not cause damage on both sides of the arm as you'd expect when you see a top jaw and a bottom jaw lock, and then knocked John down the stairs, you'd have to believe that this group of people made up of cops, their families, and unrelated young people decided that rather than call an ambulance, they would dump John in the snow to die in the cold. And then none of them would crack over the next few years, despite the horrible trauma this would represent. And despite the fact this would have happened very, very quickly. Jen delayed checking to see how long it would take to die in the cold until 2:27, when this would have happened closer to 12:30. And she still Googled It's Raining Men, despite her friend, very close friend, is lying in the snow, freezing to death outside. Meanwhile, Lucky, the snowplow driver, didn't see John outside, even though he would have had to have been there by then if this were merely an accident.
So the pre-planned conspiracy theory at least pushes the timeline back some, and it makes some of these problems go away, but it introduces others. To be true, it must be the case that the group planned to attack John, a Boston police officer, for some unknown reason. It's hard to imagine that they did not intend to kill him, since to do otherwise would open them to all sorts of prosecution. If you lure a cop to your house and beat him halfway to death, there are going to be questions. And there's obviously the possibility that you're going to be arrested. Now, what's interesting, though, is they chose to launch this attack on Brian Albert Jr.'s birthday, while people who were not members of the family were present. And in fact, they invited numerous other unrelated people to attend the party, people who were only not present because they chose not to attend. These people included Karen Reed herself, who was only not in the house because she decided to go home. The other people in the house either did not hear the attack, an incredible risk to take if you are one of the conspirators, or were aware of the attack and have been keeping that secret ever since. They completed this attack while avoiding any defensive or offensive wounds themselves, and without John displaying the kind of defensive or offensive wounds you'd expect from a trained officer fighting for his life.
Then there's the incredible luck of the conspirators. John's phone, despite having to have been in the house with John when he was killed, did not register that he entered the home. If it had, the entire conspiracy would be undone. In fact, the phone stopped registering movement immediately after Karen dropped him off, another tremendous stroke of technological luck. Then there's Karen herself. Despite having no idea that the conspirators had chosen to beat John and dump him in the snow to frame Karen for hitting him, Karen immediately assumed she'd done just that the next morning when she wakes up. She told people she thought John was dead, and she even speculated that he could have been struck by a snowplow. Now, her rear headlight was shattered, presumably by John throwing a drink at her taillight, leaving broken taillight pieces in exactly the place they'd need to be for her to have struck him accidentally or not accidentally the night before. This event also apparently deposited taillight pieces in John's clothing, and in another stroke of luck, John's DNA ended up on the taillights. But DNA from the dog the group used to attack did not end up on his clothes. And speaking of his phone, remember, don't forget the last episode when we read ad nauseum the text and call records of Karen and John. John hadn't been planning to be with this group that night at all. And really, he was with this group because of Karen. But Karen is decidedly not part of this conspiracy.
Yeah, when they gave the high sign, it's time to go. You know, when that happened is unclear, but you're right. I mean, there was some amount of, we're going to plan this for a time where it's convenient, and then this is our opportunity. We're going to lure him back to Brian Jr.'s party, which, I mean, talk about parents of the year award and to the year award. We're going to use his birthday as a time to murder this man. They decide to do that almost on the fly, but they have this whole thing planned out, and just this incredible luck of everything happening with Karen that just so happens to fit with the cover-up that they want to put in place. And I know that's a lot, but the incredible luck continues. The group dumped the body just where it would need to be if Karen struck him. Karen just so happened to accelerate backwards that night at the incredible speed of 24 miles per hour. If you don't think that's fast, try it. I have been trying it basically since we've done this. I have still not gotten up to it. It is terrifying. I cannot imagine doing that under any circumstances unless I just was so angry or so drunk I wasn't thinking. And Karen just so happened to get very angry the night before at John, making her look like an angry killer, an angry drunken killer. Though despite leaving multiple profane messages, she never yelled at John for throwing a drinking glass at her SUV, which if she had done would also have undone the conspiracy. Imagine if she had said that on one of the phone calls. It would the whole conspiracy starts to fall apart. And all these people involved in this conspiracy never cracked at all. Despite the defense investigation and an FBI investigation uncovering all sorts of evidence of Trooper Proctor's malfeasance, they never found anything in Jen McCabe's phone or in their investigation that would actually tie any of these people to this crime. They were never able to definitively show that any of this happened, or even to raise enough evidence of a conspiracy that this attempt to convict Karen Read could not continue. And if the FBI had found evidence of a conspiracy, you can guarantee this trial would not have moved forward. And Trooper Proctor, despite being incredibly negligent in his own phone usage, managed to plant taillight pieces, transfer DNA, delete ring camera evidence, and do whatever other things the conspiracy requires without leaving a single trace of himself. These are the things you have to believe for this to be a conspiracy.
So, what are we left with? Karen did it. What do you have to believe that Karen killed John? You'd have to believe that Karen Read, who had at least 4 vodka tonics and at least 5 shots of alcohol in a short period of time, was drunk that night. You have to believe that Karen's car recorded a rapid backup, more than 24 miles an hour from standstill, because Karen Read accelerated that quickly when she hit John. You'd have to believe that Karen, who called John more than 50 times between 12:33 and 6 a.m. and left messages saying she hated him, was very, very angry at 12:32 a.m. when the reverse would have taken place.
You have to believe that Karen Read, when she said she hit, may have hit, could have hit John, said that because she did indeed hit him. You have to believe that Karen saw John's body underneath the snow when no one else did, because Karen Read hit him and knew where his body would be found. You have to believe that John had pieces of taillight embedded in his clothes because Karen Read hit him. You have to believe that John's DNA was on broken pieces of taillight because Karen Read hit him. You have to believe that a hair matching John was frozen to Karen's bumper because Karen Read hit him.
And you have to believe that taillight pieces, John's shoe, and a broken drinking glass were found in the snow the same day as John's body because Karen hit him, rather than because they were planted there. You have to believe that Karen panicked after waking up and not finding John despite dropping him off the night before at a party and having no reason to be concerned because Karen Read hit him. You have to believe that Karen called Carrie Roberts and told her John was dead before 5 a.m. and before she'd even left the house or had any reason to think John was dead because Karen Read hit him. You have to believe that Karen told John's daughter that John might have been hit by a snowplow before she had any indication that anything had happened to John because Karen Read hit him.
You have to believe that Karen's first thought was that John was dead instead of asleep on someone's couch after a night of drinking, because in fact, Karen Read hit him. You have to believe that an unusual side swipe strike made it difficult, if not impossible, for accident reconstructionists to recreate this accident. You have to believe that Karen described just such a side swipe strike to her father and Aiden Kearney, Turtle Boy, because that is in fact what happened. You'd have to believe that the supposed conspirators called and texted each other not to plan the cover-up, but to discuss the death of a friend in their front yard.
You have to believe that whatever caused John's injuries to his arm, it wasn't a dog attacking him as part of his death. You'd have to believe that all the people who were in or around the house and said that John never entered the house said that because John never entered the house. You'd have to believe that the fact John's cell phone data says he never entered the house is because he never entered the house. You'd have to believe that Brian Albert and Brian Higgins changed their phones either because they were upgrading them or because they didn't want a defense team trying to frame them to get their hands on them.
You'd have to believe that Michael Proctor acted horrifically because he believed Karen Read killed a cop, not because he had decided to frame an innocent woman for someone else's crime. You have to believe that the reason no evidence of the conspiracy was found on the phone of Jen McKay by either the state police or the FBI is not because she is a technological wizard, but because no such evidence exists. And you'd have to believe that when Brian Albert said that he wished that John and Karen had come into the house that night, that he absolutely meant it. Because if that were true, John would still be alive today, and Karen Read wouldn't have hit him.
That's everything you'd have to believe that Karen Read hit him.
And look, I mean, this is one that I think at the end of the day, everybody's going to have to make a decision for themselves about what exactly happened and what exactly is more likely. You've watched the trial. You've listened to us. I don't want to speak for Alice. I'll give you sort of my 30,000-foot view of what happened. I've already kind of said this. Based on the evidence, let me say this. Based on the evidence, if I was on the jury, I think it is likely that she's guilty of second-degree murder. I don't know that they were able to show enough to show beyond a reasonable doubt that she was guilty of second-degree murder. There are pieces of evidence that point that way, but her drinking, she drank so much. And some of the stuff she did makes me think that she either didn't realize how hard she'd hit him. I think she knew she hit him. But I think she either didn't realize how hard she hit him or she didn't realize what the consequences would be. All the calling, all the texting. I feel like that, to me, is not the kind of thing you saw, say, in the Scott Peterson case, where you have a call that is very clearly meant to create an alibi. I mean, these are angry calls. You know, the fact that she, the next morning, drove by Fairview, I think was her confirming that the thing she woke up and realized was true, which is that she had hit John. Whether or not that fact that she didn't stop at that point and call the police turns it into second-degree murder, I mean, I don't know. I just think second-degree murder is hard to prove. And honestly, I don't feel like the Commonwealth really focused on that. The Commonwealth really focused on proving she was drunk and proving she hit him. And I think they proved that, despite the jury's non-verdict. I definitely would have found her guilty of that. I definitely would have found her guilty of leaving the scene. I don't know that I could have got there on second-degree murder, even though in my heart, I think she probably knew enough of what she was doing to actually be culpable for second-degree murder.
Only slight degree from you, Brett. She absolutely hit him. I think that is, the evidence is there. She absolutely hit him. Then the question is whether she intended to do so, if she was too drunk to know what she did. And here's what I think happened. I think that there is a case for murder too. And I think simply the Commonwealth just didn't present enough evidence to show that it was murder too. Because based on, we listened to all the testimony, it's a little hard to get to murder too. But there are certain nuggets, and it's not because the evidence isn't there. I think the Commonwealth simply didn't pursue it enough in this particular case because they were so focused on disproving the conspiracy. So if they were to stick with murder two, which honestly I think the best case for them, they should just drop murder two, because a jury, I think no matter what, with a defendant who is somewhat likable in the sense that she's pretty and she doesn't look like a killer, you're going to have probably some holdout who says, I don't know, she hit him, she killed him, but I don't know if she intended to kill him, so murder two is hard for me to get no matter what your evidence is. I think you have dead to rights that she hit him. So you can prove all the other lesser included charges. Drop murder too. Don't make this harder on yourself, especially with all of the media circus around it. But with that said, I think the evidence actually is there for murder too at certain points, because at certain points she has moments of lucidity, and then the morning of, around the 5 to 6 a.m. period before they ultimately find John's body, that is her period of figuring out what her story is going to be, and that completely shifts what's happening in her mind. What I think happened that night, I don't think she was too drunk to know what she was doing. I think she intended to accelerate from 0 to 24 because she knew John was behind her, and she intended to hit him, and she intended to peel out of there, and she said, F it, I don't care, because I'm so effing mad at you. Look at my 1,000 texts to you today. I've been mad at you, not just today, but for many days, because these darn kids are getting in the way of our relationship, and I didn't sign up to be a stepmother, and all I want is to go to Cabo with you and have fun, and instead I have to think about donuts and whether I can give them sugar and blah. Ugh, this is not the life I signed up for, so F you, John. Hit him, good. That SOB deserved it. Drove off. Kind of like if you've ever been so drunk, not that I have been, but if you've been so drunk and you do something stupid, but you're fully aware what you're doing, like you take off your pants at a party, or you flash someone, right? You do something you totally know what you're doing, but your capacity to feel embarrassment or remorse is incredibly low. So you go streak the colonnade. I've never heard of anyone doing that before. But you do things that you wouldn't normally do in your daily life, but because your inhibitions are incredibly lowered because of those 9 drinks you've had that night, fine, say it's 5 drinks, whatever it is, you're well over the legal limit. So your F-it bar is much lower, though you are fully aware of what you're doing. And what's happening throughout the night is not that she didn't know she hit him or left him for dead. It's that the F-it bar was too low. And as she sobered up, and the reality of what she's done, suddenly she's like, holy crap, I took off my pants at the bar. That was a stupid thing to do. Oh my gosh, all my coworkers were there. I'm not saying she did that. I'm using an analogy to why you would do something that you normally wouldn't do in public when you're very drunk. And she's beginning to realize what has happened. And that F-it bar is climbing up because she's getting more and more sober, not just because her blood alcohol level is literally being processed out of her body, but because the cold, hard daylight is coming through, and she can't kind of be in that heat of the anger that she was in because they got in a fight. They got in a fight over what's her name's mom as part of the directions that Jen McCabe was giving him. That's what the fight was about, right? She was steamed and she was in her rage, and we saw her in her periods of rage from the text messages. When she's in that period of text message rage, you see how she won't take no for an answer, and she doesn't care. And she went to that extreme place at the moment she accelerated to 24. And that's why I think she murdered him, and it wasn't just a drunken accident or that she didn't know she hit him. She knew she hit him. She even kind of wanted to hit him. Does it really matter if you intend for someone to die when you have those actions that you intently take? Just like we talked about, you can fire a gun into a crowd. Didn't mean to kill anybody. Happened to just kill this, like, upstanding citizen. Well, didn't want to kill upstanding citizen Bob. Doesn't matter. Still murder. And I think that's what was happening in her mind. And I think the text and call pattern throughout the day and the way she acts that night around 12:30, going into 5 a.m. when she begins to freak out to John's daughter, begins to show all of this taking place, her trying to create an alibi, her beginning to form a way out of this when she knows absolutely she hit John. She knew what she did at the time, and she knew he was dead before she ever found him. That's why I think it's murder too, but I don't think the Commonwealth focused on that evidence at trial, and what the jury heard, I can understand them not finding murder too. But certainly, I don't understand how they could not find the lesser included crimes.
And they never really explained what she needed to find. I mean, I don't know. There was the second-degree murder thing. I think one way you can think about it is if she were just drunk and driving down the road and got into a wreck and someone died, well, then she's guilty of that homicide while intoxicated, but she's not guilty of second-degree murder. Here, the difference is it's like she saw a car and decided to accelerate into it, okay? So then she would still be guilty of second-degree murder because she's doing something on top of her drunkenness that shows that she has this intent not to kill, like Alice said, but to do something so dangerous that if death results, you're held to a higher standard, which is what second-degree murder is. And this case, it's either a really simple second-degree murder because just the fact that she hit the gas the way she did, I mean, I guess that's the proof. Like, she intentionally hit the gas to go 24 miles an hour backwards at him. She did that on purpose, so therefore it's second-degree murder is your argument. And I think that's probably right. That wasn't an accident. It's not like she was trying to back up, but she was just so drunk. She didn't know her strength. And she accelerated too fast and accidentally hit him. Like, that didn't happen, right? I mean, she decided to hit him. So I guess maybe second-degree murder would... And, you know, when you start thinking about it that way, then it becomes really... She's either guilty of everything or she's guilty of nothing. Because then it really just becomes, did she hit the gas and back up in order to hit him or not? And if she didn't, then she's not guilty. And if she did, she is. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. I don't even know if they'll retry on all the counts. The problem with second-degree murder is even if you explain it well, it still adds this aura of greater difficulty that I think gets in some people's heads. I know we've been going a while, Alice, but I do have one more thing I'd like to say about this case. Because this case, I find this case to be very irritating for several reasons. And let me just say, I'm not directing any of these comments at any of you who think the Commonwealth just didn't prove its case. Okay? Like, if you think the Commonwealth just didn't prove its case, I'm not sure I disagree with you. I mean, I think they did prove the case, but the way they presented it was so confused and in such a bad order that I can imagine if this would be hard. If this jury had found her guilty, they would have been a really conscientious jury who basically did the job of the prosecution for them. I think, at the end of the day. That's what they would have had to have done. So I'm not talking to any of you guys out there, but I do want to address this conspiracy theory just a little bit because there are a few things that I think are interesting about it. First, if you want to know what privilege looks like, it's being someone who is wealthy and positioned well enough that you can buy a defense team and a PR team that can co-opt police improprieties that we all know exist, and corruption in the police force that often are directed at communities much different from you, and use that to cover up the fact that you hit your boyfriend in a drunken rage. That is privilege. If it's not privilege, I don't know what is. And I think this case was such an example of, you know, the problem we have in our judicial system, as much as I love it, that if you got a lot of money, you can do a lot of things. And we saw that in this case. The second thing I want to say is I know that some of you have been upset with us because you think we've approached this case in a different way than we have, particularly the theory of the defense, and that we have been biased against it. And the thing I would ask you is, why are you not? It's one thing if you want to believe that the Canton or the Mass Police are corrupt or incompetent. History backs you up, to some extent at least. But that's not the conspiracy, is it? The conspiracy is that a bunch of ordinary people, some of whom happen to be cops, conspired either to attack and kill their friend or, after a tragic accident, decided that rather than calling an ambulance and helping him, they would leave him in the snow to die. And then, as if that wasn't enough, they conspired to frame an innocent woman for his murder. That is not a claim that you are required to believe just as likely as any other theory. You should have a bias against a claim like that. If someone tells you that the earth is flat, your response shouldn't be, could be. You should demand evidence, and a lot of it. You should make them prove their point. This claim, in this case, this extraordinary conspiracy, should require a similar level of proof. And there's an important reason for that. This is not fiction. It is not a fun thought experiment without cost. A lot of the cases we cover, the historical cases, our ability to do harm is very low. Not in this case. This was a case where the conspiracy did real, tangible harm. Allie McCabe and Colin Albert were 17 years old when this happened. Colin Albert has been accused by the media of beating a police officer to death. Allie McCabe has been accused of helping him cover it up, of fabricating evidence to protect Colin and to frame Karen Read. Brian Albert Jr., a kid with an anxiety disorder, will never have another birthday again without pain. Jen McCabe not only had her daughter accused of being involved in a murder, but she herself has been painted as a key member of the conspiracy, someone who decided to help kill her friend, John O'Keefe, and then frame her other friend, Karen Read, for his death. The Alberts, the McCabes, entire families slandered as killers. And they are just the beginning. Katie McLaughlin, who is an everyday hero, serving her community as a first responder, who had the misfortune of having gone to the beach a decade ago with a group of friends who included Caitlin Albert, has been branded as a criminal, as someone who would help frame an innocent woman. Chris and Julie Albert, who weren't even there that night, have had their business hammered with one-star reviews by internet crusaders who actually believe they are the good guys. Officer Seraph, Officer Lank, Timothy Nettle, Anthony Fumati, Sarah Levinson, Julie Nagel. The list goes on. And think about this. There are a dozen different variations of this conspiracy. In some of them, only some subset of these people are actually involved. 1, 2, a handful, which means that the rest of them are absolutely innocent of any wrongdoing, even if a conspiracy did happen. And yet they have been slandered too. And why? On what basis? Speculation, innuendo, mischaracterized evidence, anomalies with multiple explanations, out-and-out lies. A couple years ago, we covered the Salem witch trials, and we wondered at the time how something like that could ever happen. But at the same time, we warned that the kind of thinking that led to that tragedy is never far away. And if you ever needed proof that we are still capable of engaging in the same kind of insanity that gripped those people 400 years ago, look no further than the Karen Read trial. So yes, this case makes me angry, and this conspiracy makes me angry because it made so many more victims than just John O'Keefe, and they continue to be victimized to this day.
I will not try to mar the beauty that you just spouted, except to say Karen Read had a choice. This massive conspiracy that she put forward that ruined an entire town and ruined countless lives and continues to do so to this day was not her only path to get off and to present a defense. That is perhaps the most angering thing of all. She didn't go full Monty here because it was her only choice. No, she did this to ruin lives, truly to ruin lives, and she found attorneys to go along with her when there was no evidence to support it whatsoever. We've talked in the past 9 episodes of other theories she could have presented. Would she have been acquitted? Would she have had a hung jury? I can't say yes or no. But they didn't get this hung jury because people bought the conspiracy. They got it because of the media circus and probably because of Proctor's improprieties, which Everything Proctor did, none of which we defend, despite how loose he was with his text messaging, he never said anything about a conspiracy. He was just a terrible person who was completely unprofessional. But in none of those texts that crossed all the lines did he ever mention a conspiracy. So this is not about a conspiracy. This is not about the only defense. This is not about a vigorous defense for your client. This was an irresponsible defense. An irresponsible defense that will have repercussions for goodness knows how long. Not just because there's a hung jury and there's continued prosecution, but because the bell cannot be unrung for the 30 or so people more who have been dragged into this for years, whose lives are being torn apart on the internet and by cult-like followings on social media and in the media. That's never going to go away. And some of these people are very young, who are having to probably go through their entire young adult life known as the person who's part of the Karen Read conspiracy cover-up, who killed a cop. And there's just no basis in evidence for any of it. So, we've just talked about the defense. They couldn't have done this alone. It couldn't have caught fire without the kindling of people clicking and feeding this frenzy that is this absolutely unfounded conspiracy. This is what we mean when we say there is responsible consumerism within true crime. It's okay to be interested in these cases. It is our judicial system. It is our humanity we're trying to understand. We obviously have a true crime podcast. We seek to understand why people do some of the worst things they ever do, why people are wrongfully convicted, why people are rightfully convicted. We seek to understand all these things. But this theory would not have reached its insane heights had millions of people not fed it kindling to create this bonfire of cluster. So what you read, what you click on, what you give voice to matters in the courtroom. Maybe in a way now, even more so than it did a decade ago. But you matter, your voice matters, and it has a direct line, essentially, to what all of these other victims now are experiencing in Canton. So think about that. You may take issue with the tone that we had when we started this. It's because we had watched the majority of the trial by the time we started coverage. We had seen the cross-examinations. We had looked at the case files. And if you don't have a little bit of disdain for unfounded accusations lodged at real innocent civilians who could very well be you tomorrow, then you might need to take a step back and think, perhaps I've crossed a line where entertainment and real life have blurred, where responsibility is no longer taken in areas that we need responsibility now more than ever. And that's why perhaps we've had a tone that some of you have thought, well, I don't like that tone. I'm sorry. But I think it's incredibly important because we are all part of what this Karen Read trial became. And the reason we've covered this, we've joked a lot that we didn't really want to cover this. The reason we didn't want to cover it is because we didn't want to give additional kindling to the fire for this kind of unfounded conspiracy theory. But we wanted to give voice to reason because enough of you said, I just don't get it. I don't understand why there is this just media storm out there and I can't seem to understand why what I'm hearing, which is it seems like a hit and run, is turning into one of the biggest trials of the century. Why is that? That's why we covered the case. And I do think it's important that we did. It was difficult because we saw all the worst parts of true crime come out in this case. And again, it didn't stay on paper. It is so ever in real life. So thank you guys for sticking with us. Those of you who skipped all of these episodes, welcome back after 25,000 hours of Karen Read. But it was important to finish this even though we knew the verdict before we finished recording this, because this case is an exemplar of what can happen in many other cases and what is happening in other cases when there's irresponsible reporting and irresponsible lawyering, frankly. And so this is not even really about Karen Read and the case anymore. We're going to use this as training. Absolutely. I mean, this is going to be an exemplar for many lawyers, both defense, prosecutions, law enforcement agencies. And there is something to be learned here. So those of you who've wondered why we continue to record and really record it pretty, at length, that's the reason.
And the one thing I'll say, I'm going to talk about this much longer because we've been talking about it long enough, but Alice, the point she made at the end, law enforcement bears some responsibility here too. Do not take this as us saying that what happened with the state police in Massachusetts, not only in this case, but in the past, that allowed these kinds of conspiracy theories to take root and grow because people had so little faith in them. Frankly, a lack of faith that was confirmed by Trooper Proctor and what he did. That is the fertile ground where this stuff grows. And in this case, unfortunately, it didn't just hurt a prosecution. It hurt a lot of innocent people. So there's a lot of people with blame who can take blame here. But don't let the fact that the police did some bad things mean that everybody else gets off the hook. Don't do that. This case is a disaster and a mess all the way around, and the collateral damage is just beginning and continues to spiral outward. So with that, if you have any thoughts, shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. If you leave a 5-star review, we'll answer a question for you, though not tonight, because we've already been going an hour and 45 minutes.
But we finished it.
We did finish it. And that means next week, we will be back with a new case. It's actually another innocence case, so, it'll be fun. That we recorded like months ago, because we've had a few cases recorded that we haven't done yet. But a new case won't last 9 episodes, I promise you. In fact, it will only last 2. So we've got a few short ones for you coming up, because I know you guys like that. And as hard as it is to believe, it'll be October before you know it. So all of you who are coming back, look forward to you leaving again in 2 months when we start the October episodes. So, Alice, we've already said a lot. Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, thank you guys for allowing us to do this for 9 episodes, sticking with us. And I hope you learned something. I know you have thoughts, though.
I think I've said my piece, Alice. I think I feel good with where we ended up in this case, and I'm sure everyone who listens will agree with us wholeheartedly. So, as I've said before, you can hate us, but we're never going to lie to you. And that includes, we're not going to tell you something just because you want to hear it or just because you really believe it. If you want to come here and get our unvarnished opinions, that's what we give you on The Prosecutors. That's what you're going to get. And sometimes we're going to tell you somebody's innocent, and sometimes we're going to tell you somebody's guilty. And both of those might make you angry. But that's what we're going to do.
I'll tell you this much. Ain't nobody affecting our opinions.
No.
Literally, first of all, there's no one paying for our opinions. And second of all, you couldn't pay for our opinions. That's the real joke.
Well, if you got a couple million,
I am unviable. Brett has no morals.
And, just to wrap this up, when we say things like, we don't care what you think, we're not going to change our view, we're not saying we don't care about you as a listener. In fact, we care so much about you that we are going to tell you what we think. Always. We're never going to betray that trust with you. So we're not going to do it for ratings or because it's what people want to hear. We're going to tell you what we think. That's what you always get, and that's what you got on this case, and it's what you'll get next week when we're back. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are The Prosecutors. I'm not going to continue while she's gone, unless you guys just want me to. We can talk about something else. My kids are all asleep, I think, and they're supposed to be. Dog's downstairs. Vicious, package-biting beast. I kept those jeans for forever because I thought, these will be my, knock-around jeans. And then at some point we decided to clean up, and I was like, I need to get rid of these jeans. Now I wish I hadn't done that because I could have shown you my dog tooth destroyed jeans. They weren't destroyed. Literally, it was just it looked like a vampire had attacked me. It was these two, the two fangs. I did afterwards decide I probably should go to the pharmacy. So I did go to the pharmacy and get like alcohol and peroxide because I was like, I don't know, does whiskey really do it? Is whiskey strong enough? I just didn't know. So I did go and get it and came back and like, poured it all in there, which hurt really bad. Kind of cleaned it out and stuff because I didn't want to get an infection because I was literally flying to Austria the next day.